Welcome back. It is week 179 on Out on That Line podcast. I'm Jeff with my co-host Alex. As always, Alex, how you doing this week?
Jeff, my good time boy, my sweet cheese. I am as good as can be expected over here as just a normal human, regular Yankee Doodle bartender. How are you doing, Jeff?
I'm doing absolutely fantastic. We're going to be talking about an album this week, and I think we're gonna get right into this one because we both figured out we don't have anything to say to start the show other than the introduction, so we're just going to pile right in here. So Black Country New Road came out with a new album called Forever Howlong. Now, I had heard of this band, I think, but was not familiar at all. You know, if you were to ask me like what Black Country New Road was going to sound like, I would have thought it was some sort of grungy country kind of sound, or maybe even like a metal band. Definitely not what I got on this album. So I feel like this is a band that you've probably been into for a little while, I would assume.
So the album before this, I guess technically like the studio album before this, Ants from Up There, I had heard, and I don't think I like fully appreciated on the first listen what I was listening to. And this was a while back. I think that came out in 2022, 2023. But it was one of those instances of like, yeah, I gave it a shot, didn't really know what I had. And then I heard this story about how the lead singer and one of the founding members, this guy, Isaac Wood, he stepped away from the band citing mental health reasons 10 days before Ants from Up There came out. So 10 days before this like big album for you guys comes out, the singer goes, I'm done. I'm out of here. So good luck touring with this as well. And do what you got to do, step away. But now they're left to tour with all these songs that they decided they were like, it just doesn't feel right to do any of these songs without Isaac. What are we going to do? So they came up with a bunch of completely new shit. And that ended up being made into a live recording live at Busch Hall. And that they never made a studio version of any of that stuff. That is just stuff they wrote and took on the road. And that was something I looked at and I was like, okay, no one else is really doing that.
Mm-hmm.
They've taken this unfortunate moment with their friend and their bandmate, and they're using it as an opportunity to pivot and change radically, but also be that same thing, like dance with the date that brung you. You're still in love with exactly what it is they're doing, because most of it has to do with structure and execution. So now we're just changing who does the vocals and what's the flavor of the songs. They're a little less dark. They're a little more whimsical and positive at this point. And we're going with all female vocalists. And it is one of those radical reinventions that doesn't feel so radical in terms of it being like a complete sea change, and it's not recognizable. It changes their sound it advances their sound. You hate to say it's addition by subtraction with someone leaving, but it really did, like in a make or break moment, push their sound forward. And I think into a direction that's probably more palatable to the average listener than Ants from Up There, which I now love and think is a fucking masterpiece album. But then you get something like this, which in all honesty may top it. I don't know. Did you ever get around to listening to anything besides this one?
I did go back and listen to probably like half of Ants from Up There, just like kind of randomly went through that album. And I will say, I think I liked that more than this album. And I think,
Really?
and I think it was strictly the lyrical content, because musically there was really like it was a little different, but not drastically different. Like you're saying, I think it's exactly what you mentioned is like the change was the flavor of the songs and like how those lyrics were going to be sung. So I will not offer any criticisms towards the vocal abilities of anybody doing singing, because I think it's multiple. There's one, what's her name? Georgia Ellery or something like that. Yep. She does most of the lifting, I think, vocally, but the other ones are in there enough not to be like backup singers, or considered that way anyway. I think for me, I like my music dark. You know what I mean? Like I like those kind of songs. So it's like I'm the one that had you do that reaction to Paleface it's like I like the darker the music, kind of the more I like it, I think. So something like Ants from Up There, I think lyrically, storytelling wise, things like that, that's going to appeal to me a lot more. The other thing I didn't love about the Black Country, about the Forever How Long, is it felt less, and I suppose it's the point, but it as soon as I felt like I was kind of in a groove, it would change. And I got a lot of sense of like it was very creepy in certain sections, like the way the songwriting was, and kind of things felt like they were about to go a little bit out of control, but then they never did. And I kind of wish they did. It felt very controlled to me, which is fine. And the vocal abilities were fantastic. Like there was a lot of little like kind of operatic flourishes in there. I saw in on Genius when they kind of talk about the descriptions of the songs, like the word Baroque gets thrown around a lot, and I can see that it feels like something you might hear at like a Ren fair in certain points. It definitely does feel like that. So I think there was more on Ants from Up There that I liked, because I think it just would appeal more to my sensibilities, like as a music fan, not necessarily as like a music critic or the kind of thing we do on the show here, but I think just as a music fan, like that's more appealing to me. But it's hard for me to really criticize this album, because if the only thing that changes is just the lyrical content and it's just not for me, it's hard for me to it's I can then kind of go into the mode of like, all right, I'll just analyze things like technically and analyze it less in a way of like, what does this lyric mean? Because a lot of it I just didn't really care, especially that last song about walking the dog and like watching the guy walk the dog and pick up the poop, and like the way that the story is not the problem. It's the way that she sang it that I was like, this is just like, you can't find a way in. No matter like the couple times I listened through it, I just couldn't find a way into like their version of doing things now.
Well, and for your statement that you like a darkness and a heaviness to your music, I like a quirkiness and a
Mm-hmm.
DIY spirit and a strange sense of humor. Um, so that was very on brand for me. And when you bring up Greep and you're like, there are moments of this that were reminiscent of Jordy Greep, I think that's not a coincidence, because for a while, Black Country New Road and Black Midi, which Jordy Greep was a part of,
Mm-hmm.
were splitting bills together as Black Midi New Road. Um, and so they come from that same kind of scene, and Squid is kind of the same deal.
Mm-hmm.
And then in America, you have Cheek Face. It's a very different sound and approach, and like Cheek Face is very LA. It's very quirky. It reminds me a lot of They Might Be Giants.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have Black Country New Road, which is there's fucking clarinet in this stuff. It's like a 6-piece folk art rock. Like, you don't try to put a genre on it. You just hurt yourself.
That's the problem. I think that's the issue that I had with it is the previous album. And I think it's funny that a band can have two albums back to back, that I think demonstrates a big difference between kind of what you and I look for and like really find appealing in music. Is like, for me, I find like intensity and darkness and like aggression and stuff like that in music is like, I really find that appealing. And it doesn't have to necessarily be like heavy guitars and like heavy metal music, but things like Coulter Wall, some of the songs he sings, like Kate McCannon, is like a story about he finds her cheating and murders them both, and it's like, just there's this darkness to it that maybe I feel like I'm missing that in my life, where I want some more balance or something. But I feel like there's in it's consistent, because we do a album by a band like Lemon Twigs, and like you love that album and I didn't, and there's a lot of examples of that. And I think within this group, it's crazy that there's two albums that I think that they've done both that demonstrate, I think, a difference kind of with how you and I approach music. It's just very
Well,
interesting.
it is very interesting. And I think the thing is too, I look at it and I go, I love Ants from Up There. I have Ants from Up There. Like, I'll
Mhm.
always have that. This doesn't take that away. I think what this did for me was just like open up a new avenue into this group. That was very enjoyable. If I had gotten more of that direction, it still would have been great. I do think at a certain point with that approach, where it was that heavy, where it was that kind of dark and sarcastic in places. You may eventually hit a point of diminishing returns with that. Who knows? We'll never know now.
Mhm.
Because we got hit with this kind of like fresh take on what they were doing, which, like we said, kind of defies genre categorization, which I think Ants Up There did as well. So I look at it and I go, there's a fucking fantastic album that, again, as I say, was a masterpiece. And then you get something like this. Can a band only have one masterpiece? Are you allowed to paint two?
Well, it's like AC/DC. They had Bon Scott, and that's looked at as its own kind of era. And then they get Brian Johnson, and that kicked off a whole new era for them. So maybe that's kind of what's going to happen here.
Sid Barrett, Pink Floyd, into having, David Gilmour.
Mm-hmm.
There are these like hard personal moments that I think force radical reinvention on the part of a group or an act. And I think that's kind of what we got here. And it allowed them to unleash the musicianship in some different ways. I think by rotating between different singers, different perspectives, opening up the songwriting process, it made this album feel much more unpredictable than Ants From Up There. So whereas Ants From Up There felt like, yeah, fuck yeah, they really sat down, they really worked on this, they really locked in the structure. This was like, as a composition, as a piece of composition, this is fucking excellent.
Mm-hmm.
And Ants From Up There is excellent composition, beautiful album. Something like this was just always surprising me, taking me on a ride the way that Jordy Griep the New Sound did, where, at a certain point, well, they didn't do what I expected there. They really subverted my expectations, to eventually going, I just don't anticipate or expect anything at this point because I'm going to be wrong. They're just going to do something. It's similar to King Giz, except even if you look at King Gizzard, their stuff is structured and it goes in like these different movements,
Mm-hmm.
but it's always going to kind of, through that little jam band DNA that's in most like prog highly structured outfits like that, they'll find their way back to themes and motifs. These songs from Forever How Long just felt like they kept evolving and they weren't really following a traditional verse chorus structure.
Mm-hmm.
They were just kind of like opening up and changing. Like listening to it the first time, everything felt so fresh and so organic and like it was happening in that moment. And I think like that was one of the most wild and fun things to me about this. Whereas like Ants From Up There, highly rewarding, disciplined experience, disciplined without taking the fun out of it. It also felt fresh. It also felt like it had a lot of spirit and passion behind it. But this just felt like so spontaneous and so organic, on top of like all this brilliant musicianship that had already been demonstrated. Now you're kind of like, you learn the rules, now let your hair down and break them a little bit. Like just such a like infinitely rewarding listening experience in that way.
And there were certainly points that I enjoyed. So like Nancy Tries to Take the Night. That song was weird in the best way for me. And especially when it started like really kicking in. I can't remember what like the timestamp is of when it, they really start kind of getting funky and grooving with that one. But there was a couple points where I was like, I just wanted more of that. It's like there's, I did appreciate there were some very clever parts of the lyrics too. And I think it just, in a different form, I probably would have enjoyed a lot more, but there's no lack of like songwriting talent. So it's, to me, this is like King's Speech, Colin Firth, whereas I want Kingsman, Colin Firth.
Interesting.
You know what I mean?
Did you sit and work on that one?
No, that just came to me.
Oh, wow.
Like the King's Speech thing came to me a while ago, where I was like, I understand that this is excellent. Like I can hear the talent, the songwriting. I can understand every part of this, but it just, I like being able to just set aside the analytical part of it sometimes with these albums. And like, I want those albums to like make me feel them. And this one just never did that until that point. And it's like, so when I have to go through an album and really just almost feel like I'm almost like forcing myself to really pay attention to what's going on, because I know I'm not enjoying like the music side of it. So it's like, okay, I got to like sit through this. It's got to feel like the Academy members do when they have to watch like all those movies. which is why they probably don't watch all of those movies. But it's to me, I look at like the King's Speech. It's like, I know that's a good movie, but I didn't like it. So it's like I can appreciate every bit of the talent it takes to do this, but it just never sunk into me, I guess, is really the long and short of it.
Well, and I guess I can understand that relative to the fact that there's so much going on all at once, and it's all very different. Like I like referring to my notes in terms of like trying to go through it and be like, okay, well, how would I characterize this music to show how unique it is? Because I
Mm-hmm.
can't really assign it a genre because there's like post punk, there's post rock, there's free jazz, experimental rock, like all kinds of stuff in it. I guess if you wanted to call it like genre experimental or sans genre, that's what you could do. I just don't know what you would call this because there are songs that rock, there are songs that are a little more um like down tempo ballad kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's just impossible to characterize a lot of this other than by like what it's doing, which is it's fusing a lot of styles, it's experimenting, it's highly non-traditional structurally in terms of the like time signatures and the rhythms that they use, the layered instrumentation. You take something like The Last Dinner Party that we covered, the album from last year that we covered at the beginning of this
Mm-hmm.
year, where there's just so much happening in terms of it being like art rock, kind of having a
Mm-hmm.
chamber choir element
See,
to it.
and I think that's a really good example because I really like that Last Dinner Party album. Like there was a lot of that stuff I really, really enjoyed. And I think it's because it felt a little more like it was going to go off the rails. And I think that was part of what I like about it. And I think because it just gave me, again, that sort of sensibility, just like the difference between this album and the Ants from Up There is like it just, for some reason, the feel was different. Maybe the themes were a little darker, like there was just a little more intensity with the buildups and the music and things like that. But this one, I feel like at those points where it felt like it should be like really kind of turning into something, and it just goes into another movement, another part of the song where it's, and I think there's a lot of people that are going to find a lot of value in that. And it's just, I like my songs to end up big. I like them to end up in a spot where they didn't start with, and these did that, but just, and it feels like very personal, my criticisms of this. They just didn't do them the way that I enjoyed, I
Well,
suppose.
I was gonna say, yeah, like most of these do end in like a big kind of bombastic way that's different from where it started. And if the selling point for you on something, especially like The Last Dinner Party, is that these things kind of went off the rails in a fun way, that's how this felt to me, more so than The Last Dinner Party, which
Mhm.
I really enjoyed. But that to me always felt like you can, again, I always beat up on Duran Duran. They're always catching strays. But Caesar on a TV screen has these three components to it: the verse, the pre-chorus, the chorus.
Mhm.
Duran Duran syndrome would say only two can work. They made all three work. But it is still in that way a structure that your ear and your brain get used to, and it's pleasing to you when it returns to it.
Mhm.
You get something like Besties, the first song off this album. It's like, how do you pin it down? It just like doesn't ever go back to where it was,
Mhm.
and it morphs in such an unconventional way. And so, like, rather than necessarily like going off the rails, like this can't hold, it just like becomes unrecognizable, and that can be good or bad. If you love a hook and the hook never comes back, then that's a problem.
Mhm.
But if you're down to just like take a ride that it, it's not going off the rails so much as it's going off the beaten path, I felt like this whole album
That's a
did
good way to
that.
put it. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
So like maybe there's that element of danger that you need that's not there on this one, but there was an element of spontaneity and trust in itself and in the concept that worked for me in the same way that Jordy Griep the New Sound did, where it was just
Mhm.
like, all right, well, surprise me again. You can't not, because I've been surprised this whole time. I can't figure you out. So go ahead, tell me who you are.
Yeah, I think on their next album, they can do, obviously they can do whatever they want. I'm just some guy. But I think if they'll pull me right back in if they give it a little bit more of an edge, and they give it a little bit more of like, just I feel, because there's a song about the guy looking like James Dean and will he take care of my horse and stuff, and it's like all got a meaning and everything, but it's just a lot of it just feels very lightweight in the lyrics, and like these are big musical like movements that are going on with this, and then it just felt like to me the lyrics were never matching that kind of depth, and like it just felt like very cut and paste for the lyrics on top of this music that was very good. You can hear every bit of talent that goes along in that. And to do these songs with strange time signatures, like I've been listening to a ton of Tool lately. And that's a band where if you just listen to them casually, they sound good, they sound fine. They're just like another 90s, 2000s metal band. But if you really listen to like the drummer, especially Danny Carey, he's doing things that like you can't even like wrap your head around. You're like, how is he figuring out that beat? Like, it sounds like it shouldn't work, but it always does. And I feel like that's exactly the kind of thing that you get on this album. So I love that part of it. That unpredictability is something I'm usually really into. But for some reason, the lyrics just fell completely short for me.
Well, I guess being both a Frank Zappa guy and a King Giz guy, that's very forgivable for me because Frank Zappa would have these wonderful compositions and choose to make his songs about like farts and queefs and dialysis and Jewish people, and still wonderful songs that I love. But yeah, lyrically, that's like the biggest thing about Zappa that'll take you out of it. They'll be like, why do I feel like he's pissing in my mouth for making the time to listen to his stuff?
Yeah.
Which obviously they don't touch on here. There's more thought that goes into it. I happen to think the simplicity of like a song about a guy walking his dog and picking up a bag of shit,
Yeah.
like it works for me, and not like because it's funny. I just think like they earned that slice of life moment from me, especially because again, we'll always have Ants from Up There. And there was a lot of like raw emotion and a lot of darkness on that one that is so appreciated. And it stands in wonderful contrast to this. And that's why I love those little slice of life moments, or something like Besties, or something that's a little more like existential and profound, like Happy Birthday. Like there were a lot of like interesting, I guess maybe you would even call them like vignettes on this, that I understand where you're coming from. Lyrically, they're not necessarily Dylan's masters of war, like we like to say. But I think that simplicity and that contrast really worked for me
So
here.
here's the thing that with the lyrics, like when you read through them, like there is complexity in the lyrics. It's just, I feel like everything about what they're doing is complex except for like how they're telling these stories, like the way, the tone they're telling these stories in. Because if I liked Ants from Up There, like musically, this was, there was an advancement here. There was a certain focus on different instruments than that one had, but the talent was all there. And then you listen to something like a Jordy Griep, which is just as unpredictable and off the wall as this album is, maybe even more so. But I think there was also that like kind of scary, like edgy element to like what Jordy Griep was singing about. Is you're like, oh, is this guy like he's a creep in a hotel and like he's trying to get it? And it's just as you develop these characters and it just gets darker and darker and darker. And I think when you're singing a song about the dog, like if you sang that more, I feel like the vocal flourishes and all that kind of stuff just takes me out of it. Like if you sang that more earnestly, it would have landed so much differently for me. If you because I really appreciated like the line where's my tab that I have that on? Where is, yeah, forever. So like at the end, the old man across the street, the clinical glow from your window. Why don't you get a warm lamp? It looks like a tiny UFO is trying to land in there. Like it's very funny. Like you can see exactly what they're talking about. Is his TV's going, it's flashing lights. So like, how can that be comfortable? That seems like it's got to be a stressful environment to be in. And it's just this like stream of consciousness, thought, whatever you want to call it, just kind of coming out as they're telling the story. And it is a little slice of life. Like if I'm just reading those lyrics, I love it. And then I hear her sing it and I'm like, this is just not for me.
So you're looking for a little bit more of the genre is Sprechgesang. which is earlier when I brought up Black Midi and Jordy Greep and Squid, Fontaine's DC,
Mm-hmm.
and again, Cheek Face from LA. When I was bringing those up, one of the points I was trying to make, and I think we got sidetracked, is that they do kind of belong to this subgenre Sprechsang, where you're not necessarily straight up just talking like you're Spalding Gray. It's done like in time. There's like a metered speech to it and a rhythm to it, where there's a musicality without singing. So it's like, I think of Jordy Greep in Holy Holy. I'll arrive
Mm-hmm.
around 7 p.m. I want you to get there no later than 8. Like, he's technically like speaking all of that, not really singing it, but there's
Mm-hmm.
musicality to it. Squid did a lot of that. There's musicality to the delivery. You want to talk about like the progenitors of it, you really look at Slint, and then even before Slint, Tom Waits,
Mm-hmm.
whose whole thing has always been sort of doing that thing where you're going to talk and it's going to have a musicality to it. And I think that when that's done correctly by all the people we just talked about, that's such a powerful thing. And that is part of why Ants from Up There was so distinct and so interesting, is because there were times where it felt like Isaac Wood was basically just like kind of crying or having a panic attack, where it had this kind of intensity, and it was more like church like than it was straight up singing. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that worked really well for that material. I think the new lyrical content, the approach to that on Forever How Long, and the singing approach to it, I didn't have the same problem as you, where it's like, the way it's being sung is kind of like taking me out of it. I feel like leaving the like Sprekasang thing in the past incarnation of the band suits them, and moving in this
Mm-hmm.
direction at this point works better for me than it sounds like it worked for you.
Yeah, and I think they're. I mean, I think this album is already their biggest selling album, or at least the most streamed like songs that they have
It's hot.
is yeah, like this is the one that's they're doing pretty well with this one. So it's like clearly I'm in the minority of like real music fans that about how they feel with this. So I'm certainly going to give the next album they do another chance, because there was enough here, like the talent is there, and like it sounds enough like Jordy Grief that I found some stuff that I liked. I'm not going to go all the way down to skip it on this one. I'm going to give this one give this one a stream it, because I think if you are, there's plenty of people that aren't going to have that arbitrary, just like didn't really like the way things were being sung. I think there's a lot of people that's going to be something they can easily skip over and get right into like what you found in the album. And I think there is a lot there. I really do. I like the way that some of the stories get told is a disservice to the stories like that they're telling, is kind of where I felt like stopped me from it being a buy it, like it was for Jordy Greep or like it was for Last Dinner Party.
Well, that's fair enough. Again, I think it comes back to my opening point, which is it's a strange thing because there's enough Black Country New Road to recognize in this, from Ants from Up There to here. It's not a radical reinvention, but it was a radical refresh from a band that it's not like they needed it. It wasn't like 8 albums in there, 8 albums stale. What do we do? But it was just necessitated by circumstance, and it was an opportunity for them to then grow and take their sound into this new direction and like really steer into kind of finding a way to make the folkier stuff rock. Like, how do you make the harpsichord rock? How do you make the mandolin rock? How do you make the fucking clarinet rock? And they found a way, I think. And so we'll always have Ants from Up There. It's its own special, wonderful thing that is Black Country New Road. And Forever How Long is Black Country New Road too.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of love that. I kind of like, there's something to be said for people that are consistent and consistently entertaining their entire career, but it's exciting when people come along and pull a new trick out of the bag. It's something I've mentioned them a lot this episode because I think it's a rarefied air. And I mean it as a compliment. King Giz, like, for some reason, people can be really fucking snobby and shitty. Music people whose opinion I respect
Mm-hmm.
can be shitty about King Giz and like think that they're gimmicky because they put out a lot of albums and
Oh,
like,
they are gimmicky, but that's the point.
I don't even think they're gimmicky. I think they're insanely talented,
Yeah.
and they operate under the auspices of psychedelic rock, which doesn't even apply all the time, but it buys you a lot of leeway. And like the next one we're getting is like disco giz. We've had country giz.
Mhm.
We've had dreamy acoustic giz on paper
Had
mache
metal
dream balloon.
giz.
Yeah. And all of it like lives inside of a psychedelic heart and a
That's my
prog
favorite.
heart.
It's my favorite giz.
Yeah, you like the Petrodragonic
Oh yeah.
Apocalypse, which is a great album. I haven't heard a clunker from King Giz. So when people get this weird attitude about like their weird name and they're always, it's so gimmicky to do the disco in the country, it's like, nope, it's all there because it's all united around the thing that makes King Giz, which is the time signatures, the willingness to experiment with structure, the recurring motifs that you hear with different instruments and different sounds. You'll hear threads of country giz, things that you heard
Mhm.
on B741, you hear in paper mache dream balloon. So like you hear in Polygon Wonderland, like it's all there. There's a sound that animates this whole unit, and then they pick different like genres and different things to play with.
Mhm.
And so being a King Giz guy, let's a little, I guess, shout out for them amidst this, but they exemplify why I think this album works so beautifully is because it was the same old, and yet no, it wasn't. And I think it's a wonderful feat where it's someone you recognize and love, and they just give you something new to appreciate along the way. So for
Mhm.
me, this one, when I've got the walking around money freed up for it, is a buy it.
Well, that's, I mean, on average, it's higher than a stream it for this episode. So I'm going to hide behind that when people inevitably come for me
Love
and
it.
say that I was wrong about this. But it was another good episode in the books. Alex, was there anything else you wanted to cover before we head on out of here?
Yeah, just cover the spread in the Celtics game. Just kidding. I don't have money on it. I don't bet on the Celtics in the playoffs. Only emotionally, not monetarily. So no, I have nothing else.
Some would say that's worse.
Yeah, someone would say that's much worse.
Well, good luck to all you C's fans out there. And until next time.